to show us. You could play it through the television, of course. Well, we'd never seen Joan's cottage at Swanmore, but John and Eileen had been there for a holiday in 1983, and John had taken his video camera and taken some photos, and he was able to show us different scenes of the cottage that Joan lived in and the gardens around, and it gave us a better idea of what it was like just there. Also, he showed us pictures of Jenny's house at Little Casterton. John and Eileen had been for a holiday near Stamford, and of course that wasn't a long way from Little Casterton where Jenny lived, so they'd gone to see Jenny, or Jenny had come to see them. I'm not sure which it was, but at any rate they were able to spend an afternoon with Jenny and the children, and John took this videotape of them, and he also showed us a tape of Donna too, playing about the house and different things that he'd made that she was playing with, and we had quite an interesting time looking at these tapes. It was like watching television, only of course the actors were relatives of ours. And in February, Joan left Swanmore and came to live in Wissendine in a bungalow there, and unfortunately the weather was very bad at that particular time. In fact, I think on the day they moved up from Swanmore to Wissendine, there was snow on the ground, if it wasn't actually snowing at the time. But I know it wasn't the kind of weather that you usually choose for moving. But Jill and Jenny and family and Colin, they'd all moved in to help them to get things going, to put the furniture in its right place, put carpets. In fact, Jenny and Jill had been there before and been putting carpets down and seeing to things like that, so that it made it a lot better for them. Now, at the beginning of this year, too, unfortunately, the miners decided to go on strike, led by a communist, Arthur Scargill, a bit of a wild man, and at this time of the year, it could have been very unpleasant for the people of this country, because we'd had a previous one in a few years before, and it had meant that sometimes we'd had to go without light and heating and all that sort of thing, so that they weren't considering the fellow workers when they went on strike. They were only considering themselves. Well, luckily for us, the Nottingham miners were against this strike, and they decided to stay in. They decided to keep on going to work and producing the coal. And it was a good job for us that they did, because the country would have been in a mess if they'd all come out. But it meant that the country could keep going on coal. They never had to shut the power stations down, or there was never any shortage of heating. So although it was a bad thing for the country as a whole, luckily there was none of the really unpleasant effects that would have happened if all of the miners had come on strike. Now, about this time, too, I don't know quite what time of the year it was, but Mrs. Powell's, one of Mum's close friends, she'd been in hospital for carcinoma before, and she'd had treatment for it and got over the worst of it and come out. But it unfortunately it recurred, and she had to go in again. But fortunately, again, she seemed to be able to get over it, and after a month or two in hospital, she was back home again. The next thing that happened, worth recording, is that this was more about May time, April rather. And I came down one morning and went into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, and I opened the cupboard where we kept the sugar and the jams and things like that, certain kinds of food, and I found no end of ants crawling about. In fact, they'd got in the jam pot, and anywhere where there was anything sweet, they were simply swarming over it. And I had a terrific job of killing them as fast as I could. And of course the jams and things like that where they got into, we just had to throw into the dustbin. But it took me, I should think, about a fortnight at least before I could clear them out, and in order to do that I'd had to go down to Boots the chemist and get ant killers and all the different things that we could use to keep them away. I had to go round the floor with the vacuum cleaner and suck them up into the vacuum. There was that many running about on the floor. But eventually we did get rid of them, but it took quite a long time. And about this time too, Mum had to have the doctor again. She said every so often she seemed to have a pretty bad attack of something, and which necessitated getting the doctor in. And of course, one thing I'd wanted to do was to do some painting, because the downstairs room, the living room, really wanted redecorating. It hadn't been done for a long time, and there were different parts of the house wanted doing. But because Mum couldn't stand the smell of paint, it had to just go by the board. Then I had to go to the doctors because my neck suddenly became allergic to sunshine, and I don't know what the trouble was, but it was something that when the sun got on my neck, it caused it to itch, and it came up in, if I scratched it, it came up in little sores, and I had to go to the doctor, and he gave me some cream for it and advised me to, whenever I went out in the sun, that was particularly in the garden when my neck was bare, to put a scarf or something round my neck to keep the sun off it. And between the keeping the sun off my neck and using the cream, I was able to stop it from getting too bad. But whenever we had some hot weather, it came up again. And in fact, I have to be very careful even to this day. And I still have a tube of cream in the medicine cupboard, so that if it comes up again, because it seems to kind of rise in little lumps. And I just rub this cream on, and it soothes it, and it keeps the air off it. It seems necessary to keep the air off it. As regards to Mum, even when the nurses came to her, all they did was wash her, and sometimes they'd comb her hair and after they'd washed her, they'd usually comb her hair and do just things like that. Well, of course, they were really jobs, as regards the washing at any rate, they were really jobs that I could do just as well. And Eileen was coming every now and again. When she came down, she'd once or twice she washed your mum's hair, and Eileen would help her to comb it and do things like that. So we didn't stop them from coming, but they must have realised, because sometimes if they were a bit late in coming to wash your mum, I'd already washed her by the time they got here. So they must have thought, well, seeing that I could cope, that there was no necessity for them to come. And of course there was plenty more people needed looking after, and some of them who were on their own and had nobody to help them at all. So of course it was only right that they should go and see to them first. Then it became a regular thing. I mean, I could look after Mum quite well in things like that. And so it kept me busy. I had something to occupy me all the time. In fact, I certainly had a lot to occupy me, one way or another. It didn't leave me much time for anything else. I mean, yeah, as far as going outside was concerned, of course, we used to watch television together at night and that sort of thing, or even in the afternoon if there was anything worth watching. But unfortunately, there was a lot of time when there wasn't anything worth watching. And then in May, Joan came to stay with us. And of course, as I've said before, with not seeing Joan as often as we saw Eileen and Sheila, of course, we liked to see her come and stop for well, we didn't mind how long she stopped. Usually it was a matter of how long she could leave Bill, but she usually stopped for nearly a week, sometimes a full week. But we were always glad to have her with us. And she kept on doing that. In fact, she's doing that to this day. She comes every now and again, although she doesn't stop as long as now. Of course, all this time, while I was looking after Mum and looking after the house, I was also seeing to the garden. And I always like to have my garden looking decent. I like to see the grass cut regularly and the edges cut regularly, in addition to seeing to the plants and the shrubs in the garden. In fact, I'd already stopped growing a lot of plants and concentrated more on shrubs because they wouldn't take as much looking after. And they would also keep the weeds down and keep the sun from getting underneath them and where the weeds were likely to grow, and to keep the weeds down. And about this time, I was beginning to have a bit of trouble with my back. With when I did a lot of bending in the garden, or when I was cutting the edge, for instance, even with the electric edge cutter, I still had to do a lot of bending, and I usually finished up with a bad back. So there was a young fella next door, Philip Marshall, that he's been out to work for quite a time, and he was looking for odd jobs, and so I got him to cut the edge for me, and he came regularly whenever the grass or the edge wanted doing, or if there was anything heavy in the garden, that especially if it required a lot of bending and say digging, because you have to do bending when you're digging. So I made use of his services to make things easier for me. By this time too, Mum's hearing was deteriorating, and that made things awkward, more awkward still, because she couldn't always tell what you were saying, and you didn't always know whether she had took in what you were saying to her, and she was getting worse on her legs all the time. And I thought, well, I really felt, one of the things I felt sorry for your mum about was the fact of her having to stop in the house all the time. I didn't know how she could cope with it, never being able to go out, just although she wasn't in bed all the time, she didn't get up till about 11 in the morning, and then she'd sit in a chair till about 9:30 at night, till after the 9 o'clock news, and then we'd get her in bed, and that was it. But as I say, I don't know how she could stand it, because I don't know how I'd manage if I had to lie in one room all the time, day and night. I should certainly get fed up. So I suggested that we buy a wheelchair so that I could take her out occasionally, because she wasn't too ill to be taken out. But for some reason or other, she didn't like the idea at all. I suppose she had a bit of pride, and although it was false pride, undoubtedly, that she didn't want to go out and let people see her like that. But I don't know what her thoughts were. Of course, nobody knows really what another person's thoughts are. But although I tried to get her to accept the idea, she wouldn't, so I had to put aside the idea of buying this wheelchair. And there was one thing I had been doing over the last few years, and that was that the church at the top of Boundary Road, the United Reformed Church, they always had a Christmas bazaar, but it was usually held in November. In fact, it has always been held in November, but towards the end of November. But of course it was possible to go there, and you could buy Christmas cards, and you could buy all sorts of things that you could give us Christmas presents there. And in addition to that, there was a stall with cakes and pies and all that sort of thing, and I like to go up and try and get a few of those. And I like to go and see the whole thing. And of course it only meant, if I went, it only meant me staying away from Mum for about an hour. And so I used to do that. So, and you could buy Christmas cards and Christmas decorations, Christmas wrapping paper, books, all sorts of things. And apart from that, I liked to, it was helping the church, and the church needs help. In fact, a lot of the churches need help these days, especially in view of the falling standards of morality. They need more people going. They need more churches and more people going to them to keep them on the, try to keep them on the straight and narrow path. I mean, we're all the same. We're all liable to do things we shouldn't do and not behave as well as we ought to do. And I think you're more likely to do that if there's no church influence to point the proper way that people should behave. As I've mentioned before, as Christmas came round, the rally used to give Christmas presents, a money present to all the retired members who'd had more than 10 years 10 years working at the rally. Well, I'd been there 28 years, and of course, if you'd been there more than 20 years, you got a bigger present than those who'd been there less than that sum. And it was usual for us to go to a kind of a gathering where we were addressed by the chairman of the company, or the manager, the managing director, and he used to make a statement from the platform and tell us how the firm were going on and all the things that had happened during the year that were interesting to us. And we had cups of tea free and cakes so that we could eat these and while we were listening to him. And then at the end of his speech he would tell us how much they were going to give us. Well, they stopped doing it this particular year. For one thing, the firm have been going down a bit. What's been happening is that a lot of these eastern countries like Hong Kong and China and Korea and different countries like that, they've been making bicycles themselves. Well, we used to export a lot of bicycles. In fact, we exported more than what we sold in the United Kingdom. And with all these different eastern countries developing industrially, it meant that a lot of them, they weren't only making their own bicycles, but they were supplying some of the other markets that we'd supplied before. And as a result, of course, the rally were getting less and less orders from abroad, and they'd even had to had to reduce their staff. In fact, I might say that at the present time, although I'd better not anticipate that, but there was certainly, it wasn't a matter of just losing a few men. There was hundreds of men being sacked, and the staff was being steadily reduced, the output was being reduced. It taken up the manufacturer of toys to try to help things and keep going more. But of course those toys are things that are only sold once a year on the whole, and once the Christmas rush is over, there's not a great demand for toys after that. Well, they were having a difficult time, and they were finding it harder now to give us this Christmas gift that they'd been used to. And this year was the last year that they actually held this particular meeting, or rather the previous year had been the last, because this year, instead of giving us this money at the meeting that was held, they decided to give us co-op vouchers. Well, the amount hadn't gone down a lot, not this year, because I got a voucher for £17.50. Well, you could take that to the co-op, any co-op branch, and you could get anything with it. You could buy food with it, or you could use it for anything that the co-op sold. And that's what happened this year. But as I say, this was a new departure altogether, and worth commenting on, because it gives you some idea of what happened in the next few years. And that brings me to the end of what I've got to say about the year 1984. You'll have to see what happens in 1985. Well, 1985 came. January was a cold month. Of course, January usually is, but it certainly was this month as well. But we were almost living to a programme now. Once a week, either I phoned Joan or she phoned me to let her know all the news. Sheila used to come every Tuesday. She usually came Tuesday morning, and then I'd go out and do the shopping while she was with Mum. And Eileen came regularly on a Sunday afternoon. And things were going on like that. I was doing the same thing day after day. Then in February, Mum started with bowel trouble. Well, we had Dr. Hutchinson to her, and he came and prescribed some medicine. Mum took it for a bit, but unfortunately she was getting into the habit over the past few months of just taking the first few doses of her medicine, and then she wouldn't take any more. And well, very often it meant that if she didn't take the full dose, there was no hope of cure. But if she only took 2 or 3 doses and then left off, well, it wasn't much good at all. Then later on, Eileen retired from work, and after she retired from work, she started to come on a Thursday afternoon. And about this time, I'd got chest pains, and so I thought it was my heart, because the pains were right across my chest, and they continued for some time. So eventually I went and saw Dr. Rodriguez, and he suggested that it was more likely to be digestive trouble. And as a matter of fact, that's evidently what it was, because it disappeared after a time. It'd given me some some tablets or a prescription for some tablets to take, and the indigestion or whatever it was seemed to go, and it didn't recur, so he must have been right. At this time, for pensioners, we were settled down to the idea of getting rent rebates and bus tokens free. That meant that if your rent was a certain sum and your income was below a certain sum, the council knocked so much off your rent, so that it made it easier for you to live. You weren't so hard up for money as you would have been otherwise. And the bus tokens came in very handy, because if you went anywhere on the bus, you used these tokens instead of money, so that also helped. So all these things we were getting used to having, and as I say, our life just seemed to run on one certain plan now. At this time, the government were talking about some new form of taxation. That was where tax was due from interest that you received from the bank. Of course, it was only due providing your income reached a certain level. But under the new rules, even though your income didn't reach that level, any interest that you had from banks would be deducted at source. And if you didn't pay income tax, that meant there was no way of getting it back. So I had to think about what little bit of investment I had. I had to think of putting it somewhere where this wouldn't apply. And as a matter of fact, I did do after a time. I put it into the National Savings Bank investment account, and the interest wasn't stopped at source in that, so I was able to enjoy the full income without losing any. And about April, Mrs. Bostock, she was an old friend of your mum's. Mrs. Bostock and Mrs. Pauls and your mum had all lived together in Alexandra Crescent, and they'd become friends, and they'd continued that friendship ever since. And of course, we were quite concerned when Mrs. Bostock died. Then next thing that happened was Joan had shingles. Well, the shingles are a very nasty thing for anybody to have, so you can bet we were very concerned about Joan having shingles. But although it usually takes a long time to get over them, Joan got over the worst of it anyway in a few weeks, which we were very pleased with. And in May, Bernie had a little boy, and so they'd got what they wanted, a boy and a girl. And the next thing that happened, although it didn't concern the family at all, it was due to something that happened in football. Liverpool, one of the England football teams, was in the final of the European Cup, and they were playing Italy, and it had to be played on a ground in Belgium. And some of the soccer hooligans, as they'd come to call them, they started fighting. It was supposed to be that the Liverpool fans were the ones who were to blame. They started fighting, and I can't remember now exactly how it happened, but the outcome of it was about 50 dead at the end of it. and that cast quite a nasty slur on English football. I mean, it was disgracing the whole of the England footballers and English peoples behaving like that. And that's why everybody took it to heart, because we didn't like to think that we were going to be looked upon as a lot of hooligans. There's two things about myself directly. On my birthday, on the 19th of March, Sheila's Frank took me on a visit to Jones, a kind of a birthday present, a very nice birthday present, because, of course, since Joan had the shingles, we'd been worried about her, and it gave us a chance to go and see her, to see exactly how she was. Then the next thing was Father's Day, and on Father's Day, John came round and he took me to a garden centre somewhere up Bramcourt Way, and because my three daughters were giving me a gift that would help in the garden. It was a kind of a water vat, and John took me to this place to have and we had a look round this garden centre, and we picked out this water tub. It had a tap on it, incidentally. The idea was that you put it at the end of your shed and the rainwater ran into it, and then when you wanted to water your garden, you just turned the tap on and you could water your garden. But after we'd been round the garden centre, he also took me down to see the gravel pits at Attenborough. Well, I'd never seen these gravel pits because although we used to live that way, there was no gravel pits when we lived at Chilwell, and the gravel pits actually took up a lot of land that was meadowland then. But it took me to see what it was like, and we had a walk down by the river, and then he brought me back home. So that was kind of a Father's Day present.